Now, before I begin, I know that this is a controversial stance and that I'm likely to rankle some in the community. But allow me to open by saying that Star Trek is a mostly silly show with a handful of incredibly poignant moments. As I said, I know I might ruffle a few feathers, but come along with me on this journey. One of the most famous episodes of Star Trek of all time was entitled, "Let That Be Your Last Battlefield." In this particular episode, the crew of the Starship Enterprise have encountered a damaged vessel along their journey. They bring the injured pilot on board to treat his wounds and are shocked to see that his entire body is pure black on one side and pure white on the other. They have never encountered an alien or a human species that looks like this before. The injured pilot turns out to be a figure named Lokai, who insists that he had to steal the ship he was flying, and he refuses to answer any other questions. Soon enough, the crew of the Enterprise detects a second ship. This ship is piloted by a similar-looking alien figure. He introduces himself as Commissioner Beale, and he is likewise solid black on one side and solid white on the other. He announces that he has been pursuing. He's been pursuing Lokai Stand by for technical difficulties. He announces that he has been pursuing Lokai, who is a criminal agitator and who claims to be fighting for the rights of his people. Beale insists that thousands have already died as a result of Lokai's action, attempting to upend the social order. Lokai, on the other hand, relates to the crew members the terrible oppression that he and his people were subjected to. The situation quickly comes to a head as Commissioner Beale insists on taking Lokai with him as his prisoner in order to face justice for his crime. While Kirk, the captain of the Enterprise, assures the commissioner that Lokai will be brought to justice, but only through the courts of the Federation, who can fairly determine who is at fault. Commissioner Beale is indignant. He says he will evade, delay, and escape again, and in the process, put thousands of innocent beings at each other's throats. Captain Kirk assures him that the commissioner, that Lokai will be brought to justice, and he and his crew will not be manipulated, and they will consider all the parties as equals. Well, this only frustrates Commissioner Beale all the more so. He says it's obvious to even the most simple-minded that Lokai is of an inferior breed. Mr. Spock, ever the logical first mate of the Enterprise, replies, "The obvious visual evidence, Commissioner, is that he is of the same breed as yourself." Well, Commissioner Beale laughs derisively at that. "Are you blind, Commander Spock? Look at me. Look at me. I'm black on the right side. Lokai is white on the right side. All of his people are white on the right side." This is the emotional apex of the episode. The absurdity of the difference between the two antagonists juxtaposed with the intensity of their rancor and hatred for one another, is humorous, but it's also unsettling and poignant. The differences that we recognize among one another in our world are, objectively speaking, insignificant to our species. Our Jewish tradition teaches that every single human being is descended from the same family of Adam. In the order of creation, we are all equal in holiness. And yet we see how our world is divided among racial and ethnic lines. We see how people of one national origin are regarded by people of another. We see how nuanced political differences and faraway power struggles condition us toward conflict with one another. In one sense, as Jews, we wake up in the morning to a different world than our Gentile neighbors. And yet, in another sense, it is the same world that we walk through together. Jew, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Baha'i, Republican, Democrat, Independent. Although we tend to make judgments of others along superficial lines and assumptions about their group identity, Judaism teaches that we are meant to engage with others not from surface to surface, but from soul to soul. As Rabbi Stephanie Bernstein describes it in this week's Torah portion, Moses' siblings, Aaron and Miriam, begin by criticizing their brother's marriage to a Cushite woman. They escalate their criticism by challenging Moses' role as the person through whom God speaks, noting that they too are conduits of God's word. Moses' special status as a prophet to whom God speaks directly is reaffirmed when God commands that his siblings present themselves at the tent of meeting, where God appears in a pillar of cloud. As God's presence withdraws, Miriam, and not Aaron, by the way, is stricken with snow-white scales on her body as a punishment. Demonstrating both caring and humility, Moses prays on behalf of his sister, Elna Rifana La, God, please heal her, and her recovery is assured. The fact that the Torah mentions Aaron and Miriam's criticism of Moses' Cushite wife suggests that there is more going on here than a mere sibling rivalry. They have found themselves judging her not by her character, but by her racial heritage. The Torah seems to drive this point home. The Torah seems to drive this point home by robbing us of any further depth at all. We know that this wife of Moses is a Cushite but we do not even know her name. Some people have suggested that she is in fact not a Cushite at all, but rather that this was a derogatory name for Moses' first wife, Zipporah, who was in fact a Midianite. Consider the way, for example, that ignorant or hateful people in our day refer to all Latin Americans as Mexican. The term itself isn't derogatory, but when it's used as a blanket term for any foreigner, the derision is clear. The lesson then of this week's Torah portion, or at least a lesson, is that God does not approve when we pass judgment on anyone by their race, national origin, or their affinity group. Prejudice is a sickness, just as the sickness that Miriam was stricken with, manifested in this case literally. It takes prayer and forgiveness to cure that sickness, even in the wisest and most beloved among us. There are days that we are all Miriam, making assumptions about others' true nature when we only see them on the surface. There are days when we are Moses, defending a loved one from acts of prejudice, defending our love for the person we are with, or praying for the healing of someone we care about whose mind has been poisoned by prejudice. And of course, there are days when we are Tzipporah, when we are judged, often without our knowledge, when we are unfairly and inaccurately prejudged and our humanity is diminished by those who think they are superior. Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, knew his Torah. So did Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock, or rather Bill Shatner and Leonard Nimoy. All three of them were Jewish. Now, they each had a very different relationship to their Judaism, but that's another sermon for another time. Whatever became of that half-black, half-white alien race? The often optimistic and utopian Star Trek offers a dark and bleak cautionary tale. Their chase continues, leads them back to their homeworld after millennia only to find it decimated. There are two races, those who are black on the right side and those who are white on the right side. And they have destroyed each other completely, wiping one another out. Only Lokai and Beal are left. They each blame the other for the destruction that they see, and apparently pursue their quarrel indefinitely. This is a warning of what happens to our souls when we let prejudice bring out the worst in us. The Torah warns us as well. We must all work together against the illness that is prejudice. Shabbat Shalom.